Welcome to the first episode of the Scholar Wealth Podcast. I'm Stephan Shipe, founder of Scholar Advising, and I'm glad you're here. Each week, we'll dive into questions from listeners, conversations with subject matter experts, and stories that highlight what it takes to steward wealth across generations. Today, in our very first episode, I want to introduce myself, the story behind the podcast, and what you can expect every single week. So to start us off, I'll introduce myself. My name is Stephan Shipe. My background was mostly in academia. I had PhD in finance from Florida State University for all the Seminoles out there, and spent over 10 years teaching at Florida State, University of New Hampshire, and at Wake Forest University. Followed that up with a CFA charter and the CFP designation as well. My research was in executive compensation and incentive structures, conflicts of interest. So basically how to get executives and companies on the same page with pushing companies where they needed to go, and also then shifting that over to conflicts of interest around investment advisors, investor behavior, and different structures of how investors think about their portfolios and their future. And that's been a theme throughout all of that research, and even today, working with clients, is that fascination with finance. It's not just the overall markets, but the behavior of how investors think, especially when we start jumping from someone's personal finances to the family finances. And how do you go to have that wealth move from your wealth to your children's wealth, and what types of implications that has? And that led to the founding of Scholar Advising, which is an independent, fee-only firm built to serve families with these complex wealth questions. What I love about being an advisor is that every client is unique. You could have two identical portfolios and they can end up in two very different plans because of people, their goals, family dynamics, their behavior, their history with money. And that's always been a huge motivation of mine. And one of the parts that I really enjoy about these types of conversations and working with clients is that we can apply that same level of academic rigor and really thoughtful advice that goes beyond just what would be in a textbook to real families and seeing the direct impact of that advice. And through my years of giving the advice, I've seen the need for community, for families with complex wealth. And that was the beginning of the Scholar Wealth Network, a comprehensive resource platform, this podcast, educational resources and content, and curated community events and conferences for high net worth investors and families. And that's why this podcast exists. But there are plenty of personal financial podcasts out there that cover the basics: how much to budget, how much to save for retirement, right? Basic savings goals of building up an emergency fund. But the gap that I've seen both on the educational resources side from a podcast perspective or the community perspective, even in the advice perspective, is that there are very few resources available for families with complex wealth. And that's the goal. This podcast exists to answer those more advanced, nuanced questions and provide insight into relevant lifestyle topics. And that seems to fit very well for the types of clients and listeners that we serve. We're built for complexity. We're not built for average needs, the average conversation that a quick Google search can come up with all your different answers. We want to get into the weeds. We want to get into the specifics for these high net worth and ultra high net worth families. Things like high earners with lumpy income, entrepreneurs who are looking at an exit either now or in the future, multi-generational families with legacy and philanthropy goals. All of that comes into play in the podcast. So what should you expect? Every week, we'll put out a new episode on every Monday that has a variety of listener questions, expert guests, whether they're attorneys, CPAs, lifestyle specialists, any of these, and mixing in real stories of personal financial success. And the goal here is to provide practical, clear insights tailored to complex wealth. So what do we need from you all? How can you get involved? The big thing is to submit questions. We need questions to answer. So go ahead and submit your questions, scholaradvising.com/podcast. Make sure you're subscribing on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcast. But most importantly, share it with somebody who you think could benefit. Each week, there's a variety of topics that we're covering, a variety of questions that are hitting really specific items. So if that brings up someone, you say, oh, that sounds like so-and-so, feel free to share it with them. Let them hear how to think about that question or have a different perspective of how to answer that type of concern. So to wrap up, the mission of the Scholar Wealth Podcast is really simple. It's to bring clear, expert insights to families with complex wealth. So thank you for tuning in to this very first episode. Next week, we'll jump right into our questions. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.
The information provided in this podcast is for general, informational, and educational purposes only. and is not intended to constitute financial, investment, or other professional advice. The opinions expressed are those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views of any affiliated organizations. Investing in financial markets involves risk, including the potential loss of principal. Past performance is not indicative of future results. Before making any investment decisions, you should consult with a qualified financial advisor who can assess your individual financial situation, objectives, and risk tolerance. Thanks for listening.